Well, welcome everyone. We're here to discuss the release of a new book called Voices of the Field, Pathways in Public Ethnomusicology. And I'm here with León García Corona and Kathleen Wiens, and we're going to discuss the book together. So to start with, my name is Scott Linford. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati. Can I ask you both to just introduce yourselves?
Kathleen, you first.
Good. My name is Kathleen Wiens, and I am a museum and heritage professional. I live on Prince Edward Island.
I am León García Corona. I'm assistant professor in ethnomusicology in Northern Arizona University, and I'm here in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I was really thrilled to learn of the release of this book. I think it fulfills a really important need in the field, and really loved reading the many contributions about the diverse ways that ethnomusicologists work. And I understand that actually the book is sort of a product of a chance meeting. I wonder if you guys could tell us how this book came to be.
León, why don't you go for it?
All right. So in 2015, I started working at NAU. And I think that year, the SEM was taking place in San Antonio, Texas, if I'm correct. So I flew from Flagstaff to San Antonio with a stop in Phoenix. And there she was in the American Airlines waiting room to go to Texas, Kathleen Wiens. And I should tell the audience that we met at UCLA as graduate students. So we obviously say, hello, how are you? And, we connected there. So we started to catch up with everything that we were doing. I had recently gotten this job at NAU. And Kathleen, I think you were working at the MIM and the Museum of Instruments. And I work for the Smithsonian before all of this. So we started talking, right? We started talking about how little of what we do in museums is actually taught in ethnomusicology programs. Like you have to learn it pretty much on your own. So we kept talking about it on the airplane. I think that year we came up with the idea of a panel, not a book, but a panel. We said like, hey, why don't we put together a panel for next year? I think for 2016. And this panel was the institutionalization of ethnomusicology. We also, by chance, met Susan Ryan, the former editor for Oxford University Press, and we told her the idea. We told her what we were doing in the meeting in 2016, and she said, "Well, that sounds like a wonderful idea. Would you like to publish that?" And we were like, "Yes, of course." So from then, book proposal, finding people, and that's about it.
Let me ask you why you decided to create an edited collection or why you felt an edited collection was the best way to explore the ideas you wanted to.
So I want to take a minute and start by thanking all of the great contributors who gave their time and effort and knowledge and were very patient with León and I as co-editors. And those contributors include Dan Sheehy, Wib Skippers, Colin Strawn, Nancy Gross, Jeffrey Summit, Marisol Quevedo, Patricia Campbell, Jeff Janesco, Catherine Metz, Robin Moore, Meryl Krieger, and Anthony Seeger. For myself, going into different styles of workplaces, because every workplace is individual unto itself, in the beginning, the learning curve was very steep. And there was a lot that I hadn't been trained for in terms of working in certain workplaces and certain types of work, like project-based work, teamwork, collaborative work. And so I felt, having gone through those hard lessons at the beginning of my career, I felt like it would be helpful to make those early transitions less painful for future generations and maybe share some of our lessons learned so that other people might transition more seamlessly into different types of workplaces and different types of work.
Yeah, definitely. If I can also chime in there, I think one of the reasons why we decided that this needed to be an edited volume is because different people have different paths, and they all have a particular experience. Um, so we have, people who started working in public sector in the 1970s, perhaps people who started working more recently in the public sector. But like Kathleen is saying, these hands-on experiences are not portrayed in most training in ethnomusicology. That's one thing, and the other reason why we thought it was important to have several voices, it's because we are aiming to change the I don't want to say the stigma, but a little bit kind of like the stigma of not working in an academic position. I have said this in the past in different interviews, but when somebody's not working as a tenure track or in some kind of predetermined setting, there's this, or at least I feel that there's this reaction of like, oh, so you're not doing what we train you to do, right? And it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, there's a whole world of opportunities for people who want to do that.
If I may add to that, I felt like it was vital to bring in many voices because the nature of our work is collaborative. It's collaborative from day one until whatever the finished product is that you're creating, until the project finishes. And so we would be amiss if we only included two perspectives. And there are endless perspectives. We didn't capture every single one of them. Every workplace is different. Every experience is different. This book could be endless. There are many people with our training backgrounds who are doing many, many exciting and amazing and meaningful things.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and that stood out to me in the collection as well. That first of all, yes, people are called to work in a number of different places in a number of different ways, and in a really practical way, it seems like there are opportunities, professional opportunities, and as students worry about the academic job market, I think it's good to know that there's a really rich job market with a lot of demand for the type of skill sets that are developed in ethnomusicological training. So that's great to know that that's out there.
Could I chime in and offer a second perspective to what you've just said, Scott? And then Leon, I'd really welcome your opinion on this. I don't see this book as a solution to the academic labor crisis. The academic labor crisis is a crisis that's been a long time in the making, but work in our various streams is also can be precarious for many people. And so it's not that there is necessarily an abundance of it, and it's not that it is necessarily more stable, but it's really truly about who you are as a person, where your skills and talents are, where you feel your life calling is. And there are people who do feel called to scholarship within academia, and there are people who feel called to work as scholars in other types of workplaces and other settings. And so it's really more about who one is as a person and assessing that and kind of what you want out of life, thinking more holistically, like what do you want your day-to-day to look like? And some people will thrive in an academic setting, and that's great. And some people will thrive in different settings. And this, if a reader feels like they might be that person, this would be a great book to dive into to assess a little closer. Am I where I want to be in life? What direction do I see this going? So in summary, what I'm saying is it's not necessarily a solution to the academic labor crisis, because workplaces are workplaces. We are as easily fired as we are hired. So everything comes with it's pluses and minuses. I get a little bit wary of seeing the attention that some groups like SEM are suddenly paying to non-academic labor as if this is a solution to the academic labor crisis. It's not a solution. It's just a different thing. It comes with its own kettle of fish and its own challenges. And if you read this book, you will find out more about those challenges. And you'll find out if they are for you.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point. And in my mind, I think that what drive many of us into ethnomusicology is, this intention of contributing to lessen tensions and, make it in general a better society through teaching tolerance and playing and teaching music. I think that's very valuable. But I do think that the discipline can have a bigger impact in social life. And I think as we wrote, and as I wrote in my essay too, I mean, there's no reason why ethnomusicologists shouldn't be advising on the responsible use of music in advertisement, for example, or the responsible use of music in movies. And one of the purpose of the book in my mind too is to open those dialogues, right? I mean, it seems to me that in what we learn in academic programs, we rarely see the word revenue or profit or marketing, right? And when we go out into the world, even in academic settings, the entire I think it's fair to say that the current academic structure works very much as a business mind kind of organization. So when we go out into the world with our PhDs, if we're not at least aware of the discussions taking place in higher administration about profit, revenue, marketing, we are not fully prepared to deal with the current academic or non-academic setting. So I think that's one of those important things. And like Kathleen is saying, this book is not necessarily a solution for the academic labor crisis, but it provides new horizons, or not new horizons. Actually, it just illuminates or calls attention to horizons and pathways that have existed before and that are there for many to explore. Great.
I wonder if I could take us back a little bit into a couple of the keywords that are in the title of the book. The first of which is public ethnomusicology. And just ask you each to offer maybe a definition of what that might mean, or give readers a sense of what's meant by that term, public ethnomusicology.
On the cover of the book, it says public ethnomusicology. We trimmed for space sake on the cover. The term that we use in the book is public-facing ethnomusicology, and it's a simple distinction, and it's not black and white, and it doesn't necessarily differentiate the work from applied ethnomusicology, but in one way that we are talking about people who work with the public as the primary, if not only, audience. And the reason why we make that differentiation, and again, that's not to say that there can't be overlap between all kinds of different work and this, but the reason we make that differentiation is because it changes the pathway to the final product. It's a very different pathway, and there are very different solutions required for this type of work.
One difference that I see in our use of public is that it's something that truly you can enter, you can access to whatever you're producing without a real gatekeeper. And what do I mean by that? If I put an exhibition in the American History Museum or in any museum, well, I'm thinking about the Smithsonian because the Smithsonian is free. You can just get off your car, enter the building, and you're there. You are learning, you are consuming the content that producers are putting up there. That's not the case on a public university. In a public university, you can't just enter my class on world music and sit in one of the desks. I mean, I will have to call. I mean, this is true. I will have to call security and remove that public from that class. So in that sense, it's not really public. I mean, what I'm teaching is not really public. You have to go through a process of, acceptance, etc. So I think that will be some of the differences and why this work is so important.
Mm-hmm. And I should add also that we do include some voices of people who work in university settings. Like there are educators, and their perspectives are included in this. But again, very much thinking about how do we mentor learners to become people who can adeptly move into different types of work.
Yeah, I noticed that as well, Kathleen, that some of the contributors are people who are working within, university settings, maybe on tenure track positions or not. But I appreciated that about the volume, that public ethnomusicology isn't defined by working in or outside of academia, but it's more an outlook.
About, who's your audience? Who's your primary audience? And that's not to say that, people in our lines of work don't create academic output as well. They often do, but that is not the main thrust of our work. Our job is to reach people, the millions, literally millions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Let me move to a different keyword in the title, which is one we've used a few times already, which is pathways. And I think that word is really great in describing many of the essays that are in this collection. And it just made me think about a question that I've heard students ask frequently when speaking with someone who is not sitting in a university and working in a university, which is the simple question: well, how did you get there? How did you get to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? How did you get to the Musical Instrument Museum? Because students don't really know what are the steps that you take, what's the pathway that you take to get into a position like that, and how you develop the skills along the way that you need to get into a position like that. And the other thing that stood out to me about that term in the context of this book, and this is something that Anthony Seeger writes about in the epilogue, that for a lot of the contributors in this book, their pathway towards public ethnomusicology started long before they ever entered a graduate program of any kind, even into childhood. And Kathleen, to your point, that it's really about calling and who you are as a person and what your values are, in many cases, as much as what professional opportunities present themselves. And so it was really great, really inspiring to see these different contributors discussing their own pathways. So with that said, I wonder if I could ask you both to either reflect on that approach of emphasizing pathways, and perhaps if you like to also talk about your own pathways into doing public ethnomusicology or public-facing ethnomusicology.
Leon, you want to start?
All right, I'll start. Yeah, I think like you mentioned it, Tony Seeger brings this point up in the epilogue, and to the fact that a lot of us, we were doing something before ethnomusicology that eventually kind of merges with ethnomusicology. And I think in my case, it was, growing up in Mexico City, working with my father, who's a physician, and helping him with database administration. But also during my early years, I was working as a computer consultant and also in sales. But this is back in Mexico, so it feels pretty much like a previous Doctor Who life. And I know some of you will get that reference. But like a different life, right? So the thing is that when I moved to the States and I started working working on this career of ethnomusicology, I discovered that a lot of what I learned in the past helped me in my career, whether it was organizing information about something that I was learning. I mean, it always came back. The ability to negotiate something, it also always, it was always helpful. So that eventually led me to get the job at the Smithsonian, where it was the perfect convergence of having studied musicology, knowing about sales, knowing about marketing, knowing about profit or revenue. So that was the way that I got into it, and that's how I mix what I knew before. In my essay, I talk about how I believe ethnomusicology is truly better served when you combine it with something else, whether it's psychology, whether it's law, and there's people who do that, whether it's medicine. I think when ethnomusicology is truly interdisciplinary, it really expands the purview of what we can do.
That's great. Thank you. And I think understanding what others, what their pathways have been into this kind of work is really important to being able to enter into it with purpose and with planning and with forethought.
And I realize that we've talked a lot about museum professionals, but this book covers all kinds of different workplaces. In museums, which is what I know best, so I'll speak to that. Every museum professional comes to museums with a totally different story. So there's no one pathway. And I would say the same is probably the case for other areas of culture and heritage work. Like you get there through your own individual path, and sometimes the individual things that you have to offer become your greatest selling point and your greatest offering for that particular workplace.
I finished up teaching about 2 weeks ago, and as with many who have been teaching this past year, it was pretty challenging, and I did not have a lot of kind of free time. And literally the first thing I did on my first Monday after teaching was to pick up this book because it was sitting on my desk, and I've been looking forward to reading it. And it was great. I felt really represented almost in this text, having had a previous career in community-based nonprofit work that is carried over into the ethos that have tried to bring to my work as an ethnomusicologist now. So I feel like I'm one of the readers that maybe you all were thinking about. And I also thought immediately that I would love to have students in our program reading this book and discussing this book. Because I think it would be really valuable for them. And I'm excited about doing that next year. But let me ask you, who were the readers that you had in mind as you were putting this together? Who's the audience that you were thinking of? And perhaps also, how do you see them using it? Or how will a book like this be useful for those readers?
There are many faculty who are very receptive and welcoming to this idea, but just by the nature of their career have not had firsthand experience. And so when thinking about how do you mentor students who have a variety of needs, the scholarship and the academic life comes most naturally to many mentors, and the rest does not necessarily come naturally. And so we're hoping that this book can kind of step in where people might see their own limitations and just kind of like, here you go, present this, and that this could fill some of the gaps that exist for mentors. We purposefully designed the book to be friendly towards readers who just want to read it for fun. It does not have to be tied to a course. You can pick it up yourself and read it for fun, and it's very, like, the layout is purposefully simplified. Every chapter is finished by summary points and suggestions for practitioners. So we break it down. It's super simple to read. You don't even have to, you don't have to slug through 250 pages if you don't want to. You can go to the summary points, go to the suggestions, see if there's something interesting in there for you, and then dive into that chapter if you think that there is.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kathleen. And I'll say, back to my experience reading this on my first Monday of the summer, it was a perfect transition into summertime reading, with some really substantive and inspiring work, but also extremely readable and personable. And yeah, I don't think I had really meant to sit down and read the entire book, but I did end up doing that because I just kept turning the pages. So it's very readable and approachable. One of the things we've been trying to do in our graduate program at the University of Cincinnati, and this goes back to something you spoke about earlier, Kathleen, is to ask students to be really deliberate and self-reflective about what skills they are developing in their time in graduate school, and also be really self-directive about what skills they need to cultivate or they want to cultivate, and to think about where they can apply them in the future. And so thinking of perhaps an undergraduate student or a graduate student, or perhaps someone who's just interested in the idea of ethnomusicology and isn't part of a student program. I wonder if you both could just offer some advice on perhaps what kind of skills people might think about cultivating or where they might cultivate them, or just more general advice about what sort of pathways forward might build on the pathways that people have taken to get where they are now.
I mean, anything that you are interested in naturally can be connected to the field of ethnomusicology, as León has pointed out. I have worked in workplaces with people who had vastly different professional training than I did. Working at the MIM, people came from all different backgrounds. You have music educators, you have literal rock stars, studio musicians who are just at the top of their game, and professionally we end up in the same place, just through very different pathways. And Tony Seeger, in his epilogue, talks about the importance of thinking very carefully about the level of education that you sign up for. Do you really feel like you need a master's? Do you really feel like you need a PhD? Maybe a bachelor's is the right path for you, and then adding on to that with something different and combining the two. I am going to say one word of caution. Something that concerns me amongst students who I've been lecturing in the last few years is that young people are being trained for burnout, and they're being pressured to become adept at and to professionalize at absolutely everything they do. And this has come at a cost of student mental wellness. And I have noted that even in our group of colleagues and, the wider circle of graduates, ethnomusicology is graduating incredibly capable people, all of whom have a wealth of, CVs that are 10 pages long, who are still not necessarily getting jobs. So it's not necessarily a question of doing more and doing it all incredibly well, but just really, as Tony Seeger encourages, like reflecting on who you are as a person. What's your passion? Where do you think you could develop a little more? Maybe being a little more friendly towards business acumen. In his contribution, Cullen Strawn talks a lot about the importance of learning those different languages and becoming friendly towards them, because you never know who you are going to have to deal with in the course of your career. And you may need to turn around one day and have a very heart-to-heart conversation with a person who comes from a business background as you are trying to hit them up for a $1.5 million donation. So yeah, like as León had said, like really just being open to what is to the possibilities.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. And I want to thank you just for all the work that you've both put in to this book. It just, like I said, it really meant a lot to me to read it, and I really connected with it and look forward to teaching with it in my work. Wonderful. Well, thank you both, and thank you again for the book, and I hope you all enjoy reading it.
Yeah, if I could chime in and say just one correction, I think that it was SEM in Austin, Texas.
Austin, yes, you're right.
Yes, and I remember that because of the amazing barbecue that I ate while I was there.
Oh, there you go. I think some people went to get in line for like an hour or something, right? I remember that. You're right.
Yeah.
That was you. That was good.
I think I actually remember that barbecue as well. Yeah.
That's a true Mennonite. I will stand in line for 4 hours to get my slow roasted pig.
And you brought it to the lobby. I remember we were eating in the lobby of the hotel.
Yeah, this part doesn't make the cut for the final video.
Anyway, you're right.